I want to tell you a little bit about Jack Kammer because I'm really excited. It's taken a few months to make this event happen. Jack was very gracious to agree to host tonight's workshop. And he's got a lot of insights to share with us. Let me tell you a little bit about him. He's been in this game for some time, goes back to the 80s when he was hosting a radio show called In a Man's Shoes out of Baltimore. That was from 83 to 89. During that time, Jack quickly came to see that there were serious social problems involved in male gender issues. He would go on to write a book called Goodwill Toward Men, tried to have it published in 1994, and it was canceled by his publisher before canceling was a thing. Seeing that male social issues were only getting worse, he decided to do something about it. And he earned a Master's of Social Work in 2008, discovering along the way that social work, and I'm sure it's true about many, unfortunately, mental health professions, was deeply anti-male. He then ended up working in 4 what he describes as male-related jobs after earning an MSW. He was a prison guard in the Baltimore City Jail. He was a parole and probation agent in Central Baltimore. He was a trainer with the National Fatherhood Initiative's Inside Out Dad program for incarcerated fathers. And lastly, he ran a social work consultancy called Working Well with Men. In 2015, he retired from paid work, but it was only so he could focus on other pursuits, including, and in the context in which I met him, as host of the Men Are Talking podcast, which is produced out of his outfit, Male Friendly Media. So I'm sure we're going to hear a lot about that and other elements of his background as he talks about his presentation tonight, which is all about the new anti-sexism. So let's hear from Jack. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, Justin. Nice introduction, and thank you to the participants. I'm really sorry about the delays and this echo you're having to put up with. I'm going to speak in generalities. When I say the word women, I don't mean all women. I am a counter-feminist. I am not an anti-feminist. I am not against the idea of equality between the sexes. In fact, I think that the dominant strain of feminism, the strain of feminism that is most dominant today, most at work in academia, in politics, in the media, and on the streets, is the strain of feminism that is lost its way and is not nearly as much about equality between the sexes as it promised to be. You will hear me also talk about fatherhood a lot, and just so you know, I am not a father, but that is not a non sequitur, because fatherhood, I will try to demonstrate, is important to every man. Okay, so there's my introduction. What do I mean by counter-feminism? Not anti-feminism, but if you were to go buy a car and the dealer were to say to you, here's the price, you might very well, without being mean, without being ugly, without meaning that you don't want to buy the car, you might offer a counter-offer. God forbid that car dealers could dictate what the price was going to be. So the idea of countering is not necessarily the same as the idea of opposing or negating. Think of counter proposals and counterbalance, and that's what I, as the counter-feminist, try to do, to provide a counterbalance to what I think is the very mistaken brand of feminism that is at work today. We are advocates for men. I am an advocate for the gender issues of men and boys. And as an advocate, I'm sort of arguing a case. And lawyers know that they need a theory of the case. And in doing a little research about theories of the case, these are the most important things. The Indiana University Law School is where I got these ideas. They said that the theory of the case is actually probably the most important thing that a lawyer will do. Create a believable theory of the case. It needs to be simple. You don't load on all of your statistics, all of the facts. It needs to be simple and just a cohesive, logical view that people can relate to and say, yeah, that makes sense to me. I think that perhaps one of the reasons that the men's movement has been so, shall I say, ineffectual is that we as men think that facts rule. And, maybe facts rule in science, but in politics, stories rule. Big ideas rule. And I think that we can do ourselves a favor by looking for some simple models, some simple ideas that people can hear and say, yeah, I get that. That makes sense. Unloading them with statistics and graphs and charts can make their eyes glaze over. And so what you're going to hear from me today is a pretty simple model that I hope you will be able to say, yeah, that makes sense. Never thought of it like that. Okay, so I am fully aware and appreciate the fact that there is such a thing as sexism against women. This is a word cloud of a lot of stereotypes that operated more in the past than today, but still today, operated against women. The purpose of stereotypes is to privilege one group over another, often to keep the privileged group in power and to marginalize the out group. I get that, and women certainly have endured that. And that is why this figure, Rosie the Riveter, an American icon from World War II, this is why Rosie the Riveter is so beloved amongst American women, because she was on a poster that was distributed during World War II to encourage women to enter professions that they hadn't entered before, that they previously had been told they couldn't succeed in. They became shipbuilders and they made airplanes. They were riveters, Rosie the Riveter. She demonstrated the falsehood of that word cloud of women being weak and ineffectual, and they just wanted to eat bonbons and file their nails and watch soap operas, and they cried too much. All of that stuff. So I certainly know there is such a thing as sexism against women, but the most curious sexism of all, in my view, is the idea that only one sex is ever sexist, that would be men, and only one sex is ever harmed by sexism, that would be women. That seems completely erroneous. And it's a very curious, powerful, destructive form of sexism. Now, some of you, especially the older ones of you, might know that Betty Friedan in 1963 published a book called The Feminine Mystique. And this book is largely credited with starting the modern women's movement. What a lot of people don't know is that Betty Friedan was not anti-man by talking about the problem that had no name that women faced. The problem that had no name was the fact that women who were educated, ambitious, smart, were feeling something was missing in their lives when they were constrained and confined to the role of wife, mother, and homemaker. It had no name. She identified it. She became an instant hit. And she launched the modern women's movement. But she was not anti-male. In her book, she refers approvingly to a book that appeared in Red Book magazine, a women's magazine in the U.S. in March 1962. If you look in the upper left-hand corner under the Red Book, Why Young Husbands Feel Trapped, was an article in Red Book March 1962, and she spoke approvingly of it. Let's take a look at how it's described. And she was sympathetic to this problem that men were facing, the problems that men were facing in their roles as husbands and fathers and workers. It's interesting also to note that the magazine referred to the report as a report of angry fathers. What I like about the fact that 60 years ago, the word angry fathers did not automatically dismiss the fathers as irrational, mean troglodytes. Back then, if a man was angry, people were interested in knowing why he was angry. It seems to me much more today that the angry father, the angry man, is a stereotype that immediately serves to dismiss him. So, Betty Friedan was not anti-male. She spoke about the fact that men don't have a bed of roses either. And so the stage was set for maybe some give and take back in 1963. Women certainly needed to get some things they didn't have, but she was raising the possibility that men were in the same situation. And there wouldn't be anything untoward about asking for a negotiation and some trade-offs. Well, there was a group of women in New York who called themselves the Red Stockings, and they were much more interested in taking than giving. As a matter of fact, their tactic, their strategy for making sure that nobody felt entitled to ask them to give up anything was to adopt this idea of women's total oppression. Total oppression. Women are totally oppressed. We have nothing to give. Men have everything. Men were the agents of women's oppression. And the only point of view that matters is women's point of view. Now, this is hardly an invitation for a negotiation. It's hardly an invitation to a respectful conversation and hearing about each other's points of view, valuing each other's opinions, listening to people as stakeholders in the situation. Men were completely, by this Red Stockings manifesto, banished from the table. And if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And men have been on the menu. Now, there was a bit of a battle then. Well, do we do give and take? Or do we say, no, women are totally oppressed? Well, unfortunately, it seems to me that the Red Stockings manifesto idea that women are totally oppressed is much more salient in our world today than the idea that, yeah, it's sort of a mixed bag and women have some things that they might want to share with men. That doesn't seem to be a very popular idea. So this became, at least in my imagination, sort of the standard model of relations between the sexes. The male hierarchy, the patriarchy, and the lowly, demeaned, powerless, oppressed pink line to the side, with men oppressing women. And that was all there was to be said about it. Men have all the power, women have no power. Very powerful idea. And in the idea of the theory of the case, it was a simple idea. And a lot of women said, yeah, I believe that. But some men didn't. And even some women didn't. And some men started thinking, no, there's more to this than that. It's not just about men oppressing women. Things are more complex than that. Let me play you a little piece of video from NPR, National Public Radio in the U.S. It's a radio show called Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. It's sort of a comedy quiz game.
Right now, panel, time for you to answer some questions about the week's news. Kiri, more interesting news from science. Researchers at Iowa State University studied 72 married couples, found out that a key to a happy marriage is how often the wife what?
How often she agrees with him?
Exactly wrong.
How often he agrees with her?
Exactly. How often she gets her way.
Ooh.
Ooh. This is what happened. They took these 72 couples, and they asked them to rate their levels of happiness. And then they videotaped them as they discussed some topic of importance and difficulty between the couple. The result, the happiest couples, according to both the man and the woman, keep in mind, were the ones in which the husband quickly, intently, and enthusiastically gave in to the wife's demands.
Yes!
And once again, I say, this they had a study.
I know this they had a study?
That phenomenon was well appreciated by those two men who spoke at the end. Like, what? Like you had to study this? This is the citation of the study that this little comedy bit was taken from. I'd like to comment on the fact that if the situation were reversed and the audience of men heard that they were always getting their way, I doubt they would have gone, yeah, man, that's the way it ought to be. I think they would have probably been conditioned to think, oh my God, that's terrible. We're being oppressive. We're being controlling. That's not good. We're not listening to our partners. It would have been nice if the women in the audience would have been thinking, oh man, maybe this is a problem, rather than, yeah, hooray. All right, here's another little instance of the idea that men know is not correct about women having no power.
Hi. Can I help?
Help? No, you can't help. Help implies that caring for our child is basically my responsibility, and that you're doing me a favor. Go out and try again.
Hi. Can I co-nurture?
No, you always get the floor wet.
All right, that's the idea of gatekeeping. You know, men were beginning to think about equality between the sexes, and they started thinking, I'd like to be closer to my kids like my wife is. And there was some pushback. There was some difficulty. And the problem is called gatekeeping. Now, it wasn't just feminists who were jealous about female power. Phyllis Schlafly, you might know, was the chief opponent of the Equal Rights Amendment in the United States, a woman, a conservative woman. The reason she was opposed to the Equal Rights Amendment in the United States wasn't because she thought women should have more power, but because she was afraid that the Equal Rights Amendment would deprive women of power, because in some ways they had superior power and she didn't want to equalize that. She likes to tell the story in her book, The Power of the Positive Woman, about a hoodwinked husband. And the way she tells it is like this. She has the hoodwinked husband saying, when my wife and I were married, we agreed that I would make all the major decisions and she would make all the minor ones. I decide what legislation Congress should pass, what treaties the president should sign, and whether the United States should stay in the United Nations. My wife makes all the minor decisions, such as how we spend our money, whether I should change my job, where we should live, and where we go on our vacations. You know, the hoodwinked husband is hoodwinked to think that because he's a man and he has an opinion, he's making a difference. And the woman is smart enough to know, let him think that. I'm the one who's making the decisions in this family. So, men started getting hip to the fact that they were being played for chumps. And they began looking for, at least I did and other men I know, started looking for another model other than the big, powerful patriarchy oppressing the lowly pink line. And some of us have come up with this. We're going to get into a helicopter, go up above these structures, and fly forward and then look down. And then we ask, what is that thing? I've never seen that pink thing before. Notice that the patriarchy, the male power structure, in some ways is not as impressive as it looks from one perspective. In some ways, it's a bit of a facade, like the mask that men often have to wear. Yeah, everything's fine. Oh, couldn't be better. While they're contemplating suicide. And the lowly pink line is not a lowly pink line. Viewed from above, it looks like a very vibrant and even happy and possibly even privileged city. So what is that thing? We don't have a name for it. Suzanne Langer, this was quoted by Steinem, I forget the Steinem's first name. In her book, Revolution from Within, she quoted Suzanne Langer, a philosopher in America, to this effect. The notion of giving something a name is the vastest generative idea that ever was conceived. So, we have this idea, maybe, but we have no name for it. And wouldn't it be helpful to have a name for it? Because if we had a name for it, we could study it, and we would be able to say that this thing has been shown to. We would be able to have conversations about it as readily as we currently have conversations about the patriarchy. So how to come up with a name for this thing? You know, it's something that a lot of people would rather not see. It's invisible to most people, and a lot of people would choose not to see it, just like in the movie The Matrix. And so perhaps the thing that a lot of people don't see and don't want to see, we should call The Matrix. And it's not just because of the movie that it's a good name. The Matrix, the etymology of that word is from mother, matter, and womb. And in biology, it's sort of an all-important surrounding medium or structure for cellular growth. So I propose that along with talking about the patriarchy, we also introduce to our discussions the idea of the matrix. And if we can do that, then instead of this very simplistic model, this very simplistic and wrong model of relationships between the sexes, we can talk about what's much more close to the truth. It's complex, it's nuanced. What goes on between men and women is not unidirectional, with men just oppressing women. We could have much better conversations if we add the idea of the matrix to our discussions about what's going on between men and women. All right, now let's do a little comparison between the patriarchy, the male power structure, and the matrix. A little compare and contrast. First of all, one on the left, the male structure, is a hierarchy. The matrix is a cooperative. In the patriarchy, in the male power structure, you're interacting with people who don't really care about you. But in the matrix, you're interacting with people who love you and who you love in return. In the patriarchy, being at the top is good. And that's what we all struggle to do. In the matrix, there is no top. There's just a center. And at the top of the patriarchy, the male power structure is the almighty dollar sign. At the center of the matrix, it's a big red heart. Both of those are valuable and important things to have access to. In the male power structure, the focus is on dollars. In the female power structure, the focus is on love. In the male power structure, the distance can be very great. If you're at the bottom of that male power structure, the distance between you and the dollars can be very great. Not so in the female power structure, because everybody has very approximate access to that big red heart. In the male power structure, the mechanism is that you earn, you work, you strive, and you compete for dollars. The big red heart is available nearly as an entitlement. In the male power structure, it's all about command and control. In the female power structure, there is cohesion and common interests. In the male power structure, there is struggle and strife internally. In the female power structure, there is much more internal stability. In the male power structure, all resources are self-generated. You go out and earn. In the female power structure, many resources are brought to you from outside. And so it is worth asking, would a person who spent his life in the male power structure be crazy to say, I'd like to have some equality in that matrix? Would that be wrong? Would that be surprising? It might be surprising because men are so conditioned not to think about that, not to admit that. And, the matrix is pink, and God forbid, men should be involved with anything pink. But I think we're getting over that, and we're beginning to see that there's a lot of good in the female power structure. One more thing I want to point out about the matrix, and that is that while the male power structure is one huge matrix, one huge hierarchy, the female power structure is a network of very tiny hierarchies. And while there are very few men at the top of the male hierarchy, there are millions and millions of women at the top of these little hierarchies. The big pink circle is a genegraphic symbol for a mother. The blue box is a son. The small pink circle is a daughter. Women in the current formulation of the matrix, they're the CEOs of very dynamic, powerful, strong, vital hierarchies. And it's a big ask. This is sort of me saying, I understand why women don't want to give this up. You know, men didn't want to give up even their bottom rung job in the male hierarchy, because that's what made them men. It's going to be much harder for women to accept this. And it has proven much harder for women to accept this, to accept men as equals in their families. But the pressure is on. The pressure is on. Social problems are being demonstrated to be caused, at least in part, by the absence of men in family life. This is Kyle Pruitt from the Yale Study Center.
If you want to reduce gang membership, teen pregnancy, dropping out of school, abuse and neglect of children, and substance abuse, you can do it by engaging fathers early and often in the lives of their children. We know this from the science. We know it makes sense. It's not easy, but it absolutely works. It works on these problems like aspirin on a headache. And our failure to connect the dots here with what we know is a huge unfinished problem, and our children absolutely deserve for us to stop fooling around and fix this.
All right, that is Kyle Pruitt. Here is poverty researcher Catherine Eden.
We really need to send a message to single moms that dads are important. You would think that that would be one audience we wouldn't have to convince because they're with their children every day. But I think I spent my entire early career studying single moms and have tremendous respect for them. But there is a view that I can do it on my own and I don't really need a father around. I'm kind of sufficient as a parent. Or I can swap daddies and I can bring my new partner in. He can play the father role. So I do think we need to really work harder to convince mothers of the importance of father's role and give mothers some of the messages of the research that the Rons have been sharing with us today.
Okay, so the pressure is mounting even a little bit more, and it's becoming clear that keeping men out of families is not egalitarian. It's selfish, and it's antisocial. It's destructive. It's got to stop. But a lot of women find it very difficult to accept that. I'm the mother, they say. So research was attempted. Well, okay, yeah, it's not really fathers, though, who are important in families. It's just the money that they bring. You know, a nice way of dismissing fathers and reducing them only to their money. That research has been thoroughly debunked. So now what? Well, okay, we're running out of options here. We're going to have to go to our stereotypes. Now, again, I want to acknowledge that I know that women suffered stereotypes, but less today than back in the day. This, I think, is not an overstatement of the stereotypes that are at work today about men and fathers. And I think two things I want to point out. I think if we were to have this level of criticism of women at work in the world today, we would look at this problem and say, boy, that's a lot of misogyny. I think this is a lot of misandry. Yes, men are not perfect. Some men do some very bad things, but it's kind of over the top. And I believe that the campaign of stereotyping men, back in the day it was called man bashing, when men were beginning to talk about wanting equality as parents, back in the day it was called man bashing. Today, let's see, hold on one second. Today, I think these stereotypes are finely tuned. Some finer than others, but generally speaking, man bashing and misandry is intended to disqualify men from entry and full-scale citizenship in the matrix. You can't be a good father because you're a man. You have testosterone. You're violent. You're a chauvinist. You're clueless. You don't listen. You just want to have sex. All of these things that I think, not accidentally, make men very suspect in the eyes of policymakers and judges, and even men themselves, about whether or not they should assume a full role as parents. The situation has gotten to the point where in 1996 now issued an action alert on fathers' rights. It was pretty funny because they talked about fathers' organizations being well-funded, which is pretty funny. Having been an executive director of one, I know that was not the case. And you can see that fathers' rights people were accused of abusing power in the same way as do batterers. What were we doing that was battering? Well, we were working for a presumption of joint custody. Joint custody just means I'm an equal parent. And we were working for mediation instead of court hearings. That's crime? That's bad? That means we want control? No, it means we want a seat at the table, please. All right, so the stereotypes are coming fast and furious. I'm going to play this. It's about a minute and a half, but I think it's worth seeing. This is a pretty bad stereotype.
A child who lives with domestic violence lives in darkness. She sees things no child should see and hears things no child should hear. She struggles to separate her nightmares from reality because there's very little difference. The child who lives with domestic violence isn't afraid of the dark. She's afraid of her dad because the monster doesn't live in her closet. It's just down the hall. And when she grows up, she'll be more likely to be abused. And her brother? He'll be twice as likely to become a monster himself because that's the world they know. When a woman lives with domestic violence, she's completely devastated because the person she should be able to turn to has turned on her. And she thought he'd change once they got married, had a child, or when he got a better job. But he never did. And she's tried to make things better, but she can't make him stop. So when she locks the door at night, she's not keeping danger out, she's keeping it in. And she feels hopeless, ashamed, and completely trapped. When a woman lives with domestic violence, she hears voices. And she feels completely alone. But she's not the only one. Maybe you don't live with domestic violence. Maybe you don't wake up every day shaking or jump every time the phone rings. But maybe you should look a little harder.
Okay, look, we know that domestic violence is a real problem. It's a bad thing. It's a very bad thing. But it is not a simplistic problem of men beating on women and women never beating on men. It's essentially a 50-50 proposition, not in terms of damage done, but that's more a matter of physics than intent or psychology or love or bad emotions. This is a horrible stereotype. And, if we want to talk about ways in which women commit domestic violence, I think these two clips are very important.
My clients, I've been representing victims of violence for about 25 years, and my clients have consistently said emotional abuse is worse than physical abuse. It is so much more destructive. It is what dismantles you as a person, that no one wants to get hit, no one wants to get hurt, but that the emotional abuse is worse. So my heart goes out to anybody who's experiencing that.
I'm not sure emotional abuse is best dealt with in the criminal justice system. I think actually the prosecutions of women would skyrocket.
So she seems to be suggesting that women are very heavily involved in the worst form of domestic violence. So anti-male sexism, like anti-female sexism, comes in two forms. There are negative stereotypes about men, and there are positive stereotypes about women that adversely affect men. Here's a pretty interesting one of the second type, a positive stereotype of women that is just way over the top. Women are perfect. Not a good sentiment. So this might be a better sentiment. Men are perfect, but we're great. And women are great, but they're not perfect. Can we talk about that? And this might be the essential theory of the case. Women's motives and opportunities to be selfish and sexist are at least as great as men's. The benefits of being in the matrix are at least as great as the benefits of being in the male hierarchy, where you can make money and have jobs and careers. This, I believe, is roughly the current state of affairs. Women have relatively good access to the formerly male domain of jobs, careers, government positions, but much less, it's not zero, but much less do men have access to the matrix. And a lot of men, I think, are sort of displaced, not displaced in several ways. They lose their jobs because the company decides it needs to freshen up its statistics for the shareholders and for the government and for winning certain contracts. But more importantly, perhaps, men are just thinking, wow, women, they can make their own money. What do they need me for? Well, what they might need you for is what Karen DeCrow talked about. Karen DeCrow was, in my view, just about the last really good feminist. She was the president of NOW from 74 to 77. And she believed that it was absolutely essential for women's equality that men have equality in what I'm calling the matrix. Because women can't do it all. They can try, but it's terribly stressful. And it's also not good for men to be ruled out of a situation where they could be very helpful and supportive to a woman who has a great career. Here's a few seconds of Karen DeCrow in an interview she did with me in 1993.
I've been on this campaign now for 15 years, but anytime we talk about mothers in the workforce, we have to talk about fathers. Anytime we're talking about provisions for babies, children, time off, etc., we have to think about men also.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense to me, right? So this was Rosie the Riveter's muscle. And she wanted the world to know that women were strong. And whether women wanted to be riveters or not, this was an important message, that women are strong. We are not the stereotypes that we have been told apply to us. We are not going to stay out of places where strength is required, because we have strength. Similarly, the same can be said for men. Whether we want to be fathers or not, whether we are fathers or not, this little piece of video you're going to show suggests that recognition of our ability and talents and humanity as nurturing people is the essential thing that needs to be accepted about men, just as strength is the essential thing that needed to be accepted about women. And this, we hope, we can hope, I hope we can hope, this needs to be our future. With men fully accepted and comfortable and happy in the matrix. And I wonder, how much less trouble would men be in? How much healthier would they be? How much happier would they be? How much less violence would we see in the world if they weren't always struggling and competing, but just had a place where they were loved and valued, not for what they did, but for who they were, not for their money, but for their love in their hearts. We need to be in the matrix. And that's it for me. Thank you.